So, welcome everyone to Achenti's workshops to express creativity, engaging Canadian seniors, a project made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program. My name is Lecha Canton, and I'm the founding editor-in-chief of Achenti magazine. This is Achenti's second series of workshops, and today I'm pleased to welcome you to The Many Definitions of Family, Reflecting and Journaling with Christopher DiRaddo. For those of you who may not know Chris, he is the author of two novels, The Geography of Pluto and The Family Way. He is also the founder and host of the Violet Hour reading series and book club. So Chris, the microphone is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Lecha, for this opportunity. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with me here today. This is my first ever workshop, so I'm a little nervous. But I do really appreciate everyone who's come. I'm going to do my best to entertain you and keep you engaged over the course of the next 90 minutes or so. I'm going to just share my screen because I have a lovely PowerPoint presentation to go with my talk. Here we go. So can everyone see this? Yes, all right. So, and again, thank you, Achenti Magazine. Thank you, Employment Social Development Canada. And, Lecha, for this opportunity. When Lecha first approached me, my imposter syndrome kicked in, and if you're wondering, that's a key part of being a writer is the imposter syndrome. You can't avoid it. I had no idea what advice I had to impart or even like what topic I felt informed enough to present on. But then, Lecha suggested that I write about the place of family and storytelling. It runs through a lot of my work, but also so many other works as well. Family, whether you have one or not, it's just such a central part of our culture, and it plays like a really big role in the stories that we tell, and also the Torah stories that we like. So today we're going to explore what it means to be part of a family. What are some of our favorite families? Which family stories are being told, which ones aren't? And also, how do we create honest depictions of those that we share our lives with? So today in the workshop, I'm going to talk a bit about me, who I am as a writer, why I write. I'm going to talk about the people and places that have been important to me, especially in regards to my work. I'm going to be talking about my books and projects. I'll do a little bit of a reading to you from some of them. And I will pose some questions that I hope will lead to reflection and even discussion. So, if you have questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand. We can kind of address them, or you can also say them to the end. And, we can also, there'll be time for questions at the end. So on to the next slide here. Hold on a second here. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a land acknowledgement. Before we begin, I'm going to acknowledge that I'm coming to you all live from Jajake, which is what the Ganigahaga call Montreal. This place has and continues to be an historical gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, and I'm grateful to be part of a long and proud history of creating and sharing stories on these lands. I think in the last few years or so, we've been hearing a lot about land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements tend to start a lot of the events that we do. But one of the things that I'd like to do is to share a story of something that I learned from my engagement with Indigenous folks over the last few years. I mentioned that I used to have a different job, and I've changed that job. But for a number of years, I worked for an organization called the Community-Based Research Center. And this organization promotes the health of diverse people of diverse sexualities and genders through research and intervention development. They do some really great work. What this means is that they collect data, and then using that data, they try to kind of advocate for different populations in Canada. So, data that they've collected have helped change Canada's blood donation policy, and also helped criminalize conversion therapy in Canada. And, working there was a really rewarding experience for me, and I learned a lot. One of the organization's commitments, though, is to truth and reconciliation and meaningful engagement with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And as part of that in commitment, the organization created what is called a Two-Spirit program. And for those of you who might not know what Two-Spirit is, it's a term that used within some Indigenous communities that encompasses cultural, spiritual, sexual, and gender identity. The term reflects complex Indigenous understandings of gender roles, spirituality, and the long history of sexual and gender diversity in Indigenous cultures. And so when I first started there, I had a meeting with some of the members from that team, from the Two Spirit team, and we were doing introductions. And they asked me, one of the folks in the team asked me, Christopher, welcome, tell us, who are your people? And I remember being really taken aback by that question, and I didn't really know how to answer that. My people. I'm used to being asked about my parents all the time, my grandparents, where I grew up, where my family is from in Italy, but no one had ever asked me that question before. Who are your people? And that's a question that I realize I've been writing about my entire career as a writer, and it's one that we're going to kind of delve into today. It's also a question that I'd like you to reflect on over the course of the next 90 minutes or so. Like, how would you answer that question if someone asked you, who are your people? And, at any point, also, I'm encouraging people to use the chat. Feel free to kind of, if you want to take a stab at answering that right now, you can. No worries if not. But feel free to kind of also introduce yourself if you like, and let people know where you're coming from today. All right, next slide here. All right, ooh, I went up too fast. Okay, who am I and why do I write? So this is a very cute picture of me, I think, from a very long time ago. Again, my name is Christopher DiRaddo. Today I'm 49 years old, but the guy in this picture is 21, so a very, very long time ago. I'm of joint Italian and kind of Irish Welsh descent, and I'm a gay man who lives in Montreal. Why I chose this picture, I think it's like one of my favorites, even though it's not very flattering, I think. Like, my eyes are closed, you can see my greasy forehead, my acne, but it really kind of encapsulates to me, like, the young, naive, impressionable man trying to find confidence and trying also to find community. So you can kind of see behind there's a whole big community going on. This was probably taken on my second gay pride parade. I don't think I was out at the time to my parents, but I was there with friends, and I was just kind of surrounded by community. And I didn't know that many people. I used to go to gay pride with my straight friends just because I didn't know anyone in the gay community. And so, if you're curious about the story behind this picture, I'm going to put this little link here. Where do we go here? In the chat. How do I do this? Sorry, hold on. Okay, I can't figure out how to do this, but I will provide the link at the end of this thing. If you're curious about, there's a story kind of attached to this picture. So I'm the author of 2 books, The Geography of Pluto and The Family Way. I've long considered myself a writer since I was a very young kid. Some kids played Superman, and I did that, but I pretended to be Clark Kent because I was more interested in typing on the typewriter. And, I always wanted to be a writer, but I only published my first book when I was 40. When I was young and, kind of like full of myself a little bit, I was like, oh, I'm going to publish my first book by the time I'm 25 and I'm going to be famous. But, by 25 came and I hadn't even started my book. But you know what? It takes the time it takes. So if any of you are out there also are kind of interested in writing, you haven't written your first book yet, there's no such thing as like, you don't need to do this any quickly, have fun with it, because I think, the most fun of writing to me has always been the writing part of it. Is there a question here? Hold on, I think. Oh, thank you, Alicia, for sharing Alicia just shared the link to the story of the picture. Like I said, so I only started writing my first book when I was 25, and it took me 14 years to write that book. And a part of why it took that long is because I didn't know what I had to say. I don't think that I had ever really lived, I guess, up until that point. At 25, I thought I had seen it all. Of course, I had seen nothing. I had no real opinions on things. I was actually confused about everything. And, when I did try to write something, what I would write would be just kind of like versions of other people's stories. I wasn't a horror fan, but I knew that Stephen King was very popular. So I actually tried to write horror stories at the beginning. Really wasn't me, wasn't my voice. And then also when I thought about, the kinds of stories that I read when I was younger, that also was kind of perplexing to me, because so many of the titles, I don't know what books you all had to read in school, but like, we were taught the classics, things like A Tale of Two Cities, or, the Jane Austen novels. Although they were kind of like masterfully done, they didn't really talk about my experience, my life. They didn't speak to me, I guess, as much. And, I couldn't relate to them. And so if I didn't know who I was as a writer, I also didn't know who I was as a reader, as a young person. How can I be a writer when I didn't even know what books I like to read? But that all changed around the time that this picture was taken in 1992, because part of discovering my identity as a gay man included discovering gay literature. There was a lot of it out there. Suddenly, I saw myself reflected in the books that I was reading, and I figured that I probably did have something to say. So, like I said, I came out around 19, just a few years before this picture was taken. And if you can imagine what it was like for this kid in this picture, I was very close with my family, my parents. We had our own history, our own traditions. But this kid was also very much afraid of losing his family, of them not maybe understanding, what he was going through or even who he was. He didn't even know. All he knew was he had no idea about his future. He had no idea what was to come. Growing up, it was hard for me to envision a future with me in it. When I was a teenager, I was afraid of growing up because it meant that I'd have to start a family. And as much as I love my parents and the upbringing that that I had, I knew that their life was not going to be my life. I didn't know why. I just knew that that wasn't going to happen. I couldn't imagine marrying a woman. I couldn't imagine settling down to raise a family. But I didn't know what else there was there. Like, what are the other options? Is that the only option available to me? That or the priesthood? Growing up a little Italian kid, that's kind of the two options I felt that I had. But then after coming out, it began to make sense. Sort of. I was okay with not getting married and having kids, but I still didn't know what my future was going to look like. Gay culture is often seen as kind of youth culture, and life after 25 was a mystery to me. There's a lot of ageism, unfortunately, in the gay community, and AIDS had also decimated a whole generation of older men. So there weren't a lot of role models left, couples who were still together after many years. And, at the same time, friendships were also becoming more important to me. When I first came out, most of the connections I made were very superficial. It took time for me to find those who liked me and liked me for me. And when I finally found my tribe, I wasn't about to let go. Boyfriends would come and go over the years, but my friends remained constant. And, these weren't just gay men. They were queer women. They were straight women. They were other outsiders. And, I felt that so much attention and value is placed on finding the one. Well, what if you don't find the one? What if there's no such thing as the one? What if you don't want to get married? If you don't want to raise kids? Sure, those could be valid life goals, but, they're not the only goals. You can have a family without settling down. And so as queer people, we have to find our family. That's what this kid was trying to do in this picture. He was trying to find his family. And, that is what I decided to write about. All right, next slide. Stories about families. Why do we like them? Okay, so, stories of families are basically stories about identity. They're, who we are and where we come from. And they are arguably the most compelling stories of all. We're surrounded by them, especially in movies, TVs, and novels. They're impossible to miss. There are stories about good families, bad families, ambivalent families, new families, old families, sometimes also not having a family at all. That is also a story. And, it's not only in pop culture that we consume these stories. If we know our birth parents, we might have often heard stories about why our grandparents chose to leave their country of origin, how our parents met, what it was like for a newborn sister to come back from the hospital, or, the time that your favorite aunt lived in Paris. Sometimes there are conflicting versions of these stories as well, or they're misremembered and become myths passed down generation to generation. Family stories are key to exploring what life is about, and they help us establish our identity and teach us that people from our past shape our present. So these pictures here, just to give you a little bit of context of who's in it. On the left, that picture is from my dad's family. My dad is bottom row, second from the right, the second youngest boy with a little bow tie. That's my dad. Sorry, my my Apple Watch just, I set it to Italian and picked up on that. It's so funny. So that's my dad, second to the right there with his little bow tie. And, we come from a very big family. My grandma and grandpa, my grandfather passed away before I got to know him. My grandmother died, I think, the first year that I was born. So I never really got to know my grandparents, but I did hear a lot of stories about them in their life. And, those stories stick with me today. On the right here, that is my my grandmother, so the woman in the picture holding the flowers, that is her family. So in the center there, her parents. This is like the Nardelli family, which is the other side of my family. What's crazy is that I found this. This isn't a family picture. This is a picture I found online doing research on my family history. My family is from a small town called San Pietro e Fine, which I'm researching for my next book. We're going to get to that a little bit later on in the presentation. But this photo was on the website, and I recognize the people in the two in the middle because I have seen pictures of my grandparents, but I hadn't seen their children. So these are all like the brothers and sisters of my grandmother, which I think is kind of incredible. And my grandmother is there. She is bottom, also second from the right. So I'm in the same position as my dad, along with a bunch of other people who, I never got to meet. Okay, this also is, this is my current family. So I guess like the nuclear family. There's my dad and my mother and me and my baby brother. Posing at probably a Sears studio is what we used to do back in those days. And then on the right here, this is my mother's family. So my mom is the one in the purple and white dress. She is surrounded by her brothers and sisters, all who I grew up with, and also her mom and dad. This is taken in LaSalle in Quebec I'm not sure, this is probably the late 50s. Yeah, so again, just to say that, relationships with families are kind of inescapable. Some of them are complicated, some of them are estranged, but whatever the situation, where we come from often hangs like a question mark over our lives. It's a shadow under which we grow up under. Sometimes that shadow protects us, and other times it's something that we need to escape from. And sometimes it's also something we feel the pressure to live up to, the expectations of our parents or our ancestors. We feel the weight of their stories. I'm going to just talk about some of my favorite family stories because there are so many of them out there. I think maybe have people seen Moonstruck? Show of hands or nods? Yeah, okay. So again, this was a really great movie that came out in 1987, directed by Norman Jewison and written by John Patrick Shaney. The film follows Loretta Castorini, a widowed Italian-American woman who falls in love with her fiance's hot-tempered, estranged brother. Her fiance, Johnny Camilleri, proposes to Loretta, and then has to head off to Sicily to see his dying mother. And before he leaves, he asks Loretta to visit his brother, and then those two end up falling for each other. One of the interesting things, though, about Moonstruck is that it celebrates the family over the romantic couple. It doesn't end with a wedding, as a lot of Italian stories do, but it ends with a toast to the family. Marriage is seen as a relationship of choice, but family is not. You can renounce your family, but you can't change the fact of that relationship. Okay. Next one is Flesh and Blood. So this is a novel written by Michael Cunningham. It came out in 1995. It's a book that I return to very often. Michael Cunningham, you might know him. He wrote a book called The Hours, which won the Pulitzer Prize and was turned into an Oscar-winning film. This book is like an epic tale of an American family living in the suburbs of Long Island and follows 3 generations of the Stassos family as it's transformed by ambition, love, and history. The Stassos family is the patriarch is Constantine. He's a Greek immigrant who makes it big in the construction business. He marries a woman named Mary Cuccio, who's an Italian-American woman, and they have 3 children, each fated to a very complex life. I think one of the things that I love about this book is that it really shows kind of the hidden desires between those living in suburban houses, and he throws kind of the doors of those suburban houses wide open. Grand themes of love, death, and loyalty are played out here in length. So as family stories, it's one of the ones that I think of. All right, the next one is called Pachinko, which is a fairly recent novel, and it was turned into an Apple TV series written by Min Jin Lee, came out in 2017. It's a historical fiction novel, this time following 4 generations of a Korean family who immigrate to Japan and search for home. The book starts off in 1910 with the grandparents of the central characters. Her name is Sunja. And then it ends with her grandchildren in 1989. And over the course of the book, we deal with racism, discrimination, stereotypes, and other aspects of the 20th century Korean experience of Japan. Again, to wonderful book that really touches upon the bonds of family. So now I just want to kind of just turn this over to you. This can kind of be a discussion, or it could be also a chat if you want to put it in the chat. What are some of, there's a typo here. Sorry about that. What are some of your favorite stories about families? Like when you think about stories of families, what do any come to mind in particular? Okay, yeah, sorry, Marisa?
Yeah, no. I mean, there's so many stories about family that are interesting. I guess I always start from the beginning, and take an investigative approach towards the members that are still alive. I mean, with respect, of course, but I want to know everything, because I wasn't born in, my family's from Italy. I wasn't born in Italy. I was born in Montreal, and I want to start constituting my history here in the city. And so my history begins here with my parents, but their history began in Italy, and the history of their parents. And they weren't really genealogists. Like, they didn't keep records back then, so it's very difficult to find information. So I tried to get as much information about my family and who they were and what they did and how they lived, and anything I can get I find really interesting, and then I build from there. I don't know, I think it's a very common way to go about it. Maybe others have different experiences.
Thanks, Marissa. I mean, you're doing such great work. I'm in awe of all the research that you're doing. And I was thinking recently too how lucky current generations are, because there's so much. Everyone's got a phone. Everyone's got a trace of everything. So like 50 years from now or something like that, it's not going to be really hard to really, I think, track your family's origins. But like to have to go back to manifests on ships and marriage records and stuff like that, it's quite the work. Steph, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Uh, so on the Calabrian side of my family, some of my favorite stories involve the relationship with like non-human animals. So like animals that would visit, particularly pigeons. There was like one pigeon that I heard a lot of stories about that my nonno had named Pasquale, that just kind of resonate as like a funny story. And then the other Italian, married in family were sort of like, oh, these Calabrians are crazy coming up with these stories about animals. And my mom, this is like my mom's side, she said, and then when her nonno, like when my nonno, her dad died, like Pasquale's family came and like visited like at the funeral, so just these very, very animated stories about the ways that like non-human animals are involved in the concept of family.
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, my dad had a pet pigeon. Also, it was interesting. He would come and visit him in the backyard, which I thought was always really funny. Angela, I think you're on mute there.
Right. Hi. My situation is a little different in that I was adopted and I was raised by Germans and I never felt German. And then I discovered I was Italian. So I'm trying to piece together that story. And it's very difficult if you're adopted. I mean, people do not want to participate. If you want to go and see birth records and stuff, you can't get it. You don't have the right to get that. So what I found out though is I find it absolutely fascinating, and that my family um, was a family of 13 in Loria, north of Venice, and they were glass blowers. And of all places, from watery Venice, they came to the prairie and became farmers there, and first of all bricklayers, and they were part of that wave of kind of Italians who came there. Anyway, so paralleled with and when you grow up being adopted, I was told, well, you're not really one of us, the Germans, you're not blood. So I never sort of paid attention to the German side, although it's part of me too. So I have kind of two families that I have difficulty claiming any right to their stories. And yet you need those. I don't even need the people, I need the stories.
Yeah. Very, very true. Thank you. Thank you, Angela, for sharing, and thank you everyone also for sharing in the chat too as well. I think almost like so much of literature is about story, and I think whether it's things that we consume, or like I said, whether it's our own kind of stories that we hear internally and then want to pass them down generation to generation, they're just such an endless fascination to us. Just moving ahead here then too about chosen families. So the name of this presentation is the many different versions of family. I can't get my name of my workshop right. The many definitions of family. I'm not sure if everyone here has like experience with chosen family, but chosen families are kind of seen as non-biological kinship bonds, whether they're legally recognized or not, that are deliberately chosen for the purchase of mutual support and for love. Basically, these are the people who understand you, lift you up, celebrate you, help you, love you, even without biological ties. These are the people who you save a seat for at the Christmas dinner table, right? Or who save a seat for you. Okay, and then you can kind of see here two new pictures. On the bottom here, I'm not going to name anyone just out of privacy's sake, but these are a lot of friends that I've had over the years. We're in Provincetown. If you've read my book, The Family Way, a lot of the Family Way play takes place in Provincetown. It takes place at this house that these friends return to year after year after year. Though the book is fiction, it is kind of based on reality. This is the house that we would rent. I've stayed here 5 or 6 times, sometimes with different friends. But it was always kind of, we would travel together, we would vacation together, we'd make dinners together, we'd spend days at the beach together. There would be kind of like fights. There would be makeups, it would, like a real family would, right? Like these are all kind of like people who I admire and I adore. And then on the right here, this is my partner, Greg. Greg and I have been together for about 15 years now. He's originally from Kelowna, lives with me in Montreal. And that is Theo. Theo is our cat. So Greg and I have been together for 14 years. And we had Theo for, I think, 13 of them. Theo unfortunately passed away last year, and it was really tough on Greg and I because, losing him was definitely like losing a member of the family. And, it's been about a year. I've been meaning to write about him and what he means to me, but I still have not been able to write that piece. It's still very difficult. And, I think one of the things about chosen families, we're talking about animals, right? Like, and how, stories with animals and stuff like that. But like, for me, he really was a part of our family. He is a part of our family, and I remember when he was sick, I had to go to a family event, and, one of my cousins asked me how I was doing. And I explained, oh, my cat, he's got kidney failure. He's at home. I can't stay out too late, and his response to me was like, oh, we did in my day when that happened. We got a new cat. And I remember he thought I was being funny, like, and I was just like, oh my God, like, some people still, don't really see pets as being that important to people in their family. And for me, it's like, no, he definitely is a part of my family. I would have moved mountains for him. And, I do miss him. I do miss him a lot. So just all that to say is that, like, chosen families can be pretty much a lot of things. I talked a little bit about some of my favorite stories about traditional families. And so these are some of my favorite stories about chosen families. So if people haven't heard about Tales of the City, this is a collection of, wait a second, I'm a little bit further along in my script, hold on. So this is a series of books that were written by Armistead Maupin, whose birthday is today, oddly enough. I just learned, like, today on my Facebook, it just showed up. He's 79 today. He's written 9 novels with the same characters that span about 40 years. The collection of books first started out as articles in a newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, I believe it was. And he would, you would kind of pick up the newspaper and you'd follow the adventures of the characters week to week to week. And, over the course of time, though, these characters kind of felt like lifetime friends for the reader, and one of the interesting things about the book, like I said, it started in 1976, and it really offered people like a glimpse of a possible queer future. So like, that 21-year-old impressionable Chris at the beginning here, who didn't really know what life could look like as a person who wasn't going to have a traditional family. Here, Armistead Maupin was writing about it and what it could look like. So at the center of it is a house, 28 Barbary Lane. It's the home of a woman named Anna Madrigal. She's the landlady who likes to smoke marijuana. And she basically just opens her doors to any of the kind of lost children who end up at her house. And so you've got characters like the hippie-ish Mona, there's the ladies' man Brian, there's the lovable and gay Michael Mouse Tolliver, and then, fresh from the Midwest, the ingenue Marianne Singleton. And so, the book kind of shows San Francisco as this magical utopic American experiment where traditional social morals are unraveled and liberalism prevails. It's very queer. The characters aren't isolated loners. They're not sad caricatures, but fully realized characters with like hearts and histories and lives. Famously in the book, Michael Tolliver moved to San Francisco to kind of be himself, his authentic self, but also had to leave his like a family behind and kind of leave them in Florida. I think they were from Florida, and just basically they had no idea about his life and who he lives. And famously he writes this letter, which is called A Letter to Mama, which is kind of like probably the quintessential coming out narrative ever told. So recommended picking it up if you're interested in learning more about that. There was also then the Buddies Cycle, which is a series of books that I grew up on. And earlier in that photo, when I showed you my friends François and Claude Zinn, they used to run the gay bookstore in Montreal, and I would go down and I would kind of like ask them for selections to recommend. And these were some of the books that were recommended to me. So there are 5 novels in the Buddy Cycle. There's, here's 3 of them. And written by Ethan Morden, who's a New York-based writer. These books are like, they're collections also of interconnected stories of characters, many of whom live in the same apartment building. And some are in relationships with others. Others are just friends. But, the book was groundbreaking in the fact that it combined romance and friendship, and basically saying that one's lover is also one's buddy. And so, this was, both of these books inspired The Family Way in many ways, one of my books, and maybe you'll see a little bit later on too. So now I just want to talk a bit about chosen families. We talked a little bit about traditional families, like our favorite stories from our families, but do you have an example of like a family of choice? Have you thought ever about that? I mean, do you want to speak a little bit about your family, your chosen family? You don't have to, but I mean, if anyone wanted to kind of, and it could also be it doesn't have to be your family. It could also be one that you like in popular culture. It could be a book. It could be a movie. All right, that's okay. But narratives that show families of choice or chosen families to me is always very interesting, and it's something that I think we can definitely use more of. So I've written 2 books. Some of you have read them. One is the Geography of Pluto. This one has a different cover. This is my first book that I told you it took me 14 years to write. And also The Family Way, which came out in 2021. I'm going to talk a little bit about each ones and read some short passages, and maybe explain a little bit why I chose to read these passages. So the Geography of Pluto tells the story of Will, who's a 27-year-old geography teacher living in Montreal. He's trying to get over the end of his first real relationship with a French-Canadian named Max. Will is also very close to his mother, as many gay men are, as I am growing up. His mother is a single woman. She's a librarian working at the Atwater Library in Montreal, and she's also in remission from colon cancer. So what I wanted to do with this book, though, is to draw comparisons between, 2 important relationships that gay men often have. First loves. The first love being your mother, and also the first love being the first actual relationship you have with another man. And in the book, Will kind of muses, he's curious, which is the greater love, at some point, is it the one we're born into, or is it the one we discover? So I'm going to read a short excerpt of here, just from the beginning of the book, first few pages. I shook the snow from my shoulders and walked into my apartment, throwing my keys onto the table as I closed the door. I could already hear the next day's hangover in the darkness. Steadying myself against the wall, I undid my laces and removed my boots with the sides of my feet. I tossed both boots onto the mat in the corner, but then stepped into a puddle by the door. Shit, I muttered, jumping away from the wet spot. I flipped on the light. I flipped on the lights overhead, locked the door, and pulled the offending sock from my foot. I walked down the hallway, turning on more lights as I went. The apartment was exactly how I had left it earlier that evening. Everything was tidy and in its place. The shower curtain was pulled out over the tub, the kitchen sink empty of dishes that were now stacked neatly in wooden cupboards. I had dusted, quickly vacuumed, and changed the bed sheets before leaving. I knew I was being excessive. I hadn't planned on returning home with someone, but then, who plans that sort of thing? I figured, though, I might as well be prepared. Just because I was a mess, it didn't mean my place had to be. There was a flashing red light on the phone in the kitchen, 2 messages. Hi, Will, the first one crackled. It was my mom. Just checking in. I don't remember what you were doing tonight. I could hear her running a list in her head. It's nothing important. You can call me tomorrow. Goodbye, she added stiffly, signing off as if sending a signal into space. Delete, next message. Hey there, Tiger, a voice sang with the jovial drunkenness that I recognized well. It was my best friend, Angie. Belated Merry Christmas. I meant to call you the other day, but it's been crazy here. I wish you would come. New York is such a blast. Anyway, it looks like we'll be back in Montreal on the 4th, so maybe we'll do dinner or something, and I'll tell you all about it. Maybe I'll give you a shout tomorrow. Or you can call me here at Nancy's. You've got the number. Take care, babe. And be sure to wish your mom a Merry Christmas for me. Happy New Year. I erased the second message. It was 11:15 p.m. I picked up the phone and dialed. Hello? Hey, did I wake you? No, I'm up watching the news, my mom answered with a rasp. Is everything all right? Yes, everything's fine, I said, hoping the booze in my body wasn't audible. Sorry if I'm calling too late, but I thought you might be up. No, it's fine, she said, clearing her throat. You just never know what kind of call you're going to get at this time of the night. How was your evening? It was okay, I admitted. I went out for a drink with a friend. Silly, I thought, lying to my mother at this age. I just got in. How was your night? Oh, fine. I didn't do too much. I watched some movie on TV, one of those cheesy holiday Christmas ones. I could hear the newspaper shifting on her lap. I want to know if I'm going to see you before New Year's, she said, for meals and such. How about tomorrow? I could stay over too if you like. That'd be nice, she said, pleased. Singing in the Rain was on today. I taped it. Maybe we can watch it together. Sure. I suppose it's because of the holidays, but one of my channels has been playing nothing but classics all week. You should take a look at the schedule while you're over and let me know if you want me to tape anything for you. I will. My mom was up now. I could hear her moving around her apartment, opening and closing kitchen cabinets. What would you like for dinner then? Spaghetti? Steak. I have steaks. The mere mention of food made me realize that I had not eaten dinner. Either sounds good, I said, diving toward my collection of home delivery flyers. Oh, before I forget, Angie wishes you a Merry Christmas. That's nice. Did I tell you she sent me a Christmas card? I was surprised and a little envious. I didn't get a Christmas card. Well, you see her all the time. Well, why don't you invite her over for dinner tomorrow, too? It's been ages since I've seen her. Angie's in New York for the holidays. Well, when she's back then, I'll save the spaghetti for a night she can come. I mumbled an affirmation, my concentration now on finding something to eat. I was slipping through the flyers, looking for chicken, humming along to whatever my mom was saying. There was something comforting about these aimless conversations I continued to have with my mother since I moved out several years ago. If nothing else, our voices made up these sweet harmonies that were sung to each other in ums and ahs as we carried on with our day. Well, I just wanted to call and say hi, I yawned. I should let you get to bed. Don't stay up too late now, she ordered as if I were a child. I won't. Good night. Good night, dear. Love you. I hung up the phone. So I just wanted to kind of start with this and just say, and this is how I chose to start this book, because I really wanted to contrast these two relationships that Will has. Will has a very close relationship with his mother where they talk on the phone every day. They talk about the food that they're going to have. She's kind of doting over him. His mind is kind of elsewhere at the same time. And then also there's this relationship with Angie, who is part of his chosen family. She's a queer woman. She's having a fun New York experience for New Year's. But Angie is still kind of a part of the family. Angie sends Christmas cards to Will's mom. Angie has a place at the table for the spaghetti dinner, right? And for me, that's kind of what I wanted to show here, is just like, you actually do have these two families. Almost like they're kind of equally important, but they don't also just exist in a vacuum. They also kind of like crisscross. And sometimes one pisses you off, sometimes the other one does. So anyway, Family Way. Sorry, I'm going to go to Geography Pluto. Family Way is my next book. That one came out in 2021. So this also kind of continues my exploration of chosen families. So the book tells the story of Paul, who's a gay man in his 40th year. He's in a relationship with a younger man named Michael, who is 11 years younger than him. Paul is asked, like I was, on the cusp of his 40th birthday, to help his friends start a family. And the book kind of chronicles this experience over the course of a year and a half, examining what does it mean to create a family when you're part of the LGBTQ community. And, I've revealed to you that this has some basis in fact. I have had this experience. Part of the reason that I wanted to write about it was because I didn't see a lot of stories out there about people, how they create their families. And especially from the point of view of the sperm donor. I think, I have seen a few, maybe by the point of view of two women who decided to kind of like have a kid. There's famously like The Kids Are All Right, which is that movie with, I can't remember the names of the actresses, Julianne Moore, and I can't remember the other one. But like, I wanted something that was kind of true and authentic to my experience. But it's fiction, I should say. And I'm going to get to why it's fiction a little bit later on in this. But I'm going to read a little bit of an excerpt here. Page 122. Okay. So just a little bit of before I get into this. So it's his birthday, and he's on the phone with his father, who lives in Kelowna. So Paul lives in Montreal with Michael. His father has remarried. His mother died when he was young, and his father's remarried and lives in Kelowna with his new wife, okay, and her kids. "Happy birthday, son," my father said after I answered. "Thanks, Dad. It's not until tomorrow, I know, he said, and I can hear the joy in his voice. "I wanted to be the first to call. You were born 3 minutes after midnight, but I figured you'd be in bed by then." "You'd have figured right," I said. "I can't believe you're turning 40, he said. "I can't either. I still remember the party we threw for your 40th at the Legion." My mind saw blue and white streamers strung across bowling trophies, cases of Molson X and Labatt 50 behind the bar. I must have been, 14? And Kate, his sister, 16? I can't imagine what it's like turning 40 with 2 teenagers in tow. How'd you do it? "Lots of beer," he said. "And of course there was your mother, God love her." "How you doing, Dad? How's Debbie?" Debbie's his new wife. "She's good. Off biking with her friends today." I pictured Debbie in a helmet and dark sunglasses, with a fluorescent cycling jersey and a plastic water bottle. "Didn't feel like joining them?" I asked. "Not today. I'm coming down with a cold, so I'm watching daytime TV. Lots of talk shows and people arguing with each other. Everyone has an opinion these days. I'm tired of other people's opinions." "And you're not even on Facebook?" My dad laughed. "No, I wouldn't be caught dead on that thing. Debbie's on it enough for the both of us. I figure if something important ever happens, she'll let me know." "So what are you going to do on the big day?" he asked. "Just a dinner at a friend's," I said, debating telling him that we'd all be in drag. "Sounds nice. So when are you and Michael going to come visit?" "I don't know, Dad. It's hard for me to get away." "Come on, you'd love Kelowna. Debbie and I could show you around. It would be great for you to get to know Patrick and Sue better. I wish you and Kate had come out to Sue's wedding. You could have met the whole side of the family." Debbie's daughter, Sue, had got married the year before to a roofer named Neil, but neither I nor Kate had attended the wedding. I suppose we could have, but neither of us wanted to travel all that way. Plus, it had been Gay Pride in Montreal, and I didn't want to miss it. My dad might have considered Debbie's relations to be that side of the family, but the idea was ridiculous to me. They weren't a part of our family, so we didn't need to be there. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I missed it. But it would be nice if you came and visit sometime. Your sister's been twice now." "Anyways," he said, wrapping up, as our calls never did last more than several minutes, "tomorrow will be a big day for you, and I wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday before things got too hectic. Your mother would have been very proud of what you've accomplished." I froze for a second, a flash of heat in my body. "Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Talk soon." I hung up the phone and composed myself. My dad had gotten soft with age. He was 67 now and more expressive than I ever remember him being. I don't think he had ever said, "I love you" to me growing up, but it's how he ended his calls with me for the past few years. I did feel bad for not visiting, but I only got so much time off from work. Kelowna might be nice, but it wasn't a bustling metropolis like New York City, nor did it have the province town's very gay, sandy beaches. The flight to Kelowna would be long too. I looked it up one afternoon and learned it would take 7.5 hours to get there from Montreal. That meant a lot of time in the air. There were no direct flights too, which meant I'd have to experience twice as many landings and takeoffs. "Who was that?" Michael said, standing in the doorway to our living room. "My dad, calling to wish you a happy birthday." "Did you tell him?" Meaning that they were trying to have a baby. No, there was still nothing to tell. I had recently heard from Wendy, and our second attempt hadn't worked. "We should really visit him and Debbie sometime soon," I said. Or at least I should. So again, this is another phone conversation between my main character and their parent. Geography of Pluto was the mother, this is the father. And again, too, what I'm trying here is kind of showing also the kind of push and pull between these two relationships, right? So his dad has kind of started a new family on the other side of the country. Meanwhile, Paul lives in Montreal with Michael. And, there are things like gay pride, which, he's choosing gay pride over a wedding. He's choosing over a gay pride over the wedding of his sister-in-law, his daughter. Sorry, what's the word? Stepsister. He's choosing gay pride. And so, like, for me, I wanted to kind of bring up that kind of, when he's on holiday, Paul also wants to see his family. So there's this kind of like bit of a pull and push between the two. So those are my two books. And so these are the only two books I've written, but I am working on another one. The next one is called, The next one's called Hard Feelings, which is, that's at least the working title at the moment. It's really kind of in the early days. It explores also family storytelling as well through my own family's origins. My family, you can see here, so San Pietro Infine, I think I mentioned, this is a small town in Italy where my family is from. It's 2 hours outside of Rome. You can kind of see that there on the Google Maps. There was a documentary made about it because it was completely destroyed in the Second World War and moved a little bit further down by the survivors who kind of came out of the caves once the fighting was over and kind of rebuilt. My grandfather and grandmother actually left before the Second World War, so they didn't experience that, but I do have family there. And, during the course of the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of research about the emotional inheritance that we kind of have from our parents and also our grandparents when they kind of come over to Canada from their places of origin. You could see here as well, Goose Village is where my family ended up. And right here, this is a bit of a map of where Goose Village was in Montreal back in the day before it was bulldozed in 1964 to make way for Expo 64. And I'm kind of very curious in my book about these two cities, San Pietro, which was destroyed in the Second World War, and also Goose Village, which was destroyed in the 60s. You can kind of see here, I've got the Goose Village logo. Marisa Portalese is here. And if you haven't followed her on Instagram or checked out her website, thegoosevillage.ca, she's doing an amazing job reconstructing the stories of the village and the villagers before they pass. So, like, a lot of them are quite old. And a lot of people don't know the history also of this neighborhood in Montreal that was made to disappear. So, that's been one of the really great connections that I've made over the course of the last few years with Marisa, because we're both very much inspired by our own family stories and our own family histories, and we're both finding different ways of kind of doing that. So thank you also, Marisa, for being here today. This picture here is my family in Goose Village. There's my grandfather holding, I think it's like a Coke. It's my Uncle Pat beside him, and my grandmother. I have no idea who the other people are. They're probably people from the neighborhood. I'm not really sure. I think this is their backyard. Marisa, I've kind of like put it up against the picture that you sent me. Maybe it had changed a little bit in the time it had been taken, but or maybe it wasn't their backyard, maybe it was someone else's backyard. But anyway, it's been really fun to kind of unearthing this this project. So hopefully the next book will be out within 5 years, or 3 to 5 years is like the goal. How I write. So we talked a little bit about why I write about family. Now I'm going to talk about how I write about family. I have 5 guidelines when it comes to writing about families that I try to follow. The first is to tell the truth. So this is a quote here that I have over my desk. I've had over my desk since, I don't know, university. You can kind of see even here, there's no area code on that piece of paper down there. So it's even before area codes. So, and this was something a writer had told us in class. Like, if a writer is not offending his family, friends, or nation, then he is not doing his job. I mean, we can change that to she, we can change it to they, it's basically, if a writer, it's their job to provoke. And, someone who also is not really used to rocking the boat, who is so afraid to come out to my parents, I have struggled a lot with, like, how do I tell the truth when the truth might make some people uncomfortable? And the thing is that I needed to remind myself, you have to do it. You can't write a story worrying about how people are going to think about you, if they're going to judge you. If you put sex in it, they're going to think about you having sex. So you don't just take the sex out because, maybe it's an integral part of the story. Maybe your character did something bad, and that kind of reflects maybe on you. People are going to think you did it. But like, for me, I was like, no, I think even if something is uncomfortable, I want to tell the truth. I want to be authentic. And so that is my first thing when trying to write about family. However, don't tell someone else's truth without their permission. So, you can tell your truth, but I draw the line at telling someone else's truth, especially if they're not comfortable with it. So, I mentioned earlier about, like, my friends Ashley and Jennifer, and I have a family with them. I could have easily made this book a memoir of the family way, but I didn't want to, because you know what? It's their story too. And it's the story of their children. And I didn't want to kind of put all these stuff out there to have other people kind of have a window of view on our life. So that's why I kind of changed things. That's why I made it fiction. Sure, there are things that are inspired by what really happened, but I'll never say, and sometimes too, there are situations where, pardon me, maybe I will ask someone's permission for, like, their story, like, and say, like, you lived, I had one friend who, she was in AA, and I wanted, one of my characters to also, having gone through that experience. And, it was important for me because, like, a lot of things that she lived through, I felt like I wanted to write about, not necessarily identifying her and her experience, but because by kind of giving these things to a character would actually kind of make it more real. It would make people also understand what someone like her would be going through. So again, like, I'm very, we're all inspired by the people in our lives. I would never want to tell someone's story without really letting them know that I wanted to, and also to see if they would be okay with doing that. Which is also kind of like, maybe I combine both of my guidelines here, but honor your relationship. So it's kind of like, it's part of that. It's like, so if you, these are people who are in your life. These are members of your chosen family. I don't necessarily want to kind of drag anyone through the mud. We might have had a fight one time, and it might have been really horrible, and it might have been great drama for a book. But at the same time, I'm not going to do anything that's going to make anyone uncomfortable. And I kind of want to make sure that, like, people know the reason that I am kind of writing about our lives is because I do want to honor them. Avoid cliches. So that's also something that I think is very kind of important when you talk about family. We talk about Moonstruck, which is a really wonderful movie. There's a lot of cliche, I would say, kind of also in Moonstruck. And I think also when you're dealing with, like, Italian families, sometimes there are a lot of, like, shortcuts that you can kind of do to kind of, like, make family members, I could have made Paul, their Italian family, I could have made his dad homophobic. I could have made his dad really uncomfortable with him being gay. But, I felt like that's a valid story, but I felt like that story's been told a lot within I wanted the Italian dad to be actually kind of okay with it, but actually a bit kind of weirded out by the fact that his son was having a kid. That was the thing that was, I think, you'll see in the book that he has a little more trouble with. Not the fact that his son was gay, but that his son was actually going to have a kid and kind of give the kid away to another couple. So, so I think if you're kind of writing characters, you want them to have, like, dimension. You want to make them feel real. So, this is going to go into the next kind of couple slides here. But, I think a lot of people have said about my writing that they really do like the characters because they actually feel like they're friends. And that's really kind of that's, like, wonderful to hear. That's honey. Because, Sorry, I'm just going over my notes here. I know this isn't right. So it's important for me to kind of make sure that they actually feel like real people and they're not like cliches, but also that they have dimension to them. So for instance, this is an example of something that I do when I write. So I give them full histories. So you can see here, this is a picture that I found in a magazine of someone that I'm like, oh, I think Paul would look like this. So I kind of put it here, and it helps me also separate it from me because it's not nonfiction. It's not memoir. He's another person, although we do maybe kind of look a little similar. But I need like some kind of visual. Otherwise, I'm just going to revert to myself. It's the same for other characters too. If I'm basing someone on my mother, a best friend, I try to find another picture, try to figure out what they look like, and then kind of like stare at it. And then like I kind of really go through a whole thing. This is just part of like one page of many. Like I have a notebook here that I keep that I, basically sit down and write freehand, full history. So you've got like his physical description, the day he's born, how tall he is, how much he weighs. Some writers might not bother with this, but I do this for all of my main characters because I want them to feel like they have real lives. And so you can kind of see here, Paul is a gay man who grew up in the suburbs of Montreal. He has one sister who lives in Ottawa. They're very close. Their mother died when they were 21 and 23. Their father, whose name has changed since I created this file, remarried 11 years, is living with a new woman, lives in Kelowna. So you see, like, so I can kind of go back to that whenever I want. Track their lives. So this is also something else that I do. So the first one was for my second book. This is for the one that I'm currently working on. So my book starts, it's in 1989, but you can kind of see here the backstory, everything that happened to them in their lives, because I'm going to keep going back and I'm going to referring to things in the past. But it's important for me that like I have an understanding of the life that they lived. So even though I've like written all their character and their histories and stuff like that, I need to start putting stuff to this. So for instance, I've got their birth dates there. Joan's family house burns down in 1962. In 1963, there's a scene in Port Kent. That's where like I have a big kind of action that happens in Port Kent, New York, happens there. May 1964, Goose Village is bulldozed, but like in March the year before is when his family leaves Goose Village. So I do all this because like I really want to have a very robust understanding of like these fictional people's lives so that, I don't find myself also making errors, like making them do something when they would obviously have been in high school. Like, wouldn't they be in high school at that point? Like, those are things that readers can kind of pick up, even if it's not necessarily always mentioned in the story. You could also see here age differences. So these are a lot of like secondary characters, but it's also like these are like the brothers and sisters of some of the main characters. I needed to know when they were, these are big families. I needed to know when they were born. I have a chapter that's in 1945. I have a chapter in 1953, one in 1960 and one in 1963. I need to know how old people are at that point because I might forget. So that's something that I do to track their lives. And I think I have a third one here. Oh yeah, keep an open tab on some of them. So this is my dad. My dad is Irish. No, he's Irish. He's Italian. My mom is the one who's kind of Irish Welsh. But my dad loves St. Patrick's Day like you would not imagine. This is our downstairs bar. This is a picture of him. He's got his beer. He's got his hat on. And, like I said, I'm very much inspired by the people in my life. And, and I am in many ways writing about my dad in my next book, but it's going to be fiction. But something like this to me is so fascinating, like an Italian who loves Irish culture. So when I say keep an open tab on some of them, I actually have like these tabs for all of my characters. And so when my dad did this and I took this picture, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make Pat, the character in my book, this. Like he's going to be a really big fan of St. Patrick's Day. And so like, and I don't know how, it's just going to go into this Word file. And as I'm writing, maybe there'll be an opportunity, like, actually there is, like, I just decided that I'm setting a scene at the Hunter's Horn, which was this bar in Montreal in I think the 60s or something like that. And so Pat's going to be there. And so it's kind of fun how things that happen to you in your life can kind of just inspire your characters if you kind of keep track of them, if you can kind of keep notes. And then remember, so this is another piece of paper that I keep above my desk just to kind of keep me focused whenever I'm writing. Dense and quick means try not to write very, very long sentences, Chris. No one really liked, for me, I don't really love super long paragraphs and super long sentences. Make writing that packs a punch. Setting his character. I love books that you can really understand the setting. You know, Montreal has been an important part of all my books, especially the next one. I have to really think of it as a character, not just as like a location. Read. If you're going to be a writer, you need to read. You need to read a lot. Like I said, you know, how are you going to know what kind of books you want to write if you don't read? And this is just a reminder that I should be reading more. Tell the truth. We know we went over that. Show, don't tell. This is something that I think you're taught a lot when you're in university. You know, it's very easy to kind of explain what happened. You can kind of say, I'm angry. But if you can show the anger in a scene, it's much more powerful to the reader if you can show rather than just kind of explain what just happened. Breathe in sentences as well. Like, even though I want dense and quick sentences, I do want there to be a little bit of a musicality to it. I want it to kind of like, if you were to read it aloud, that you're not kind of like just trying to get it out. See, hear, smell, feel, taste. All of the sentences, trying to engage all of the sentences with your senses with your work. You want your reader to be able to see what you're seeing, hear what you're seeing, smell what you're seeing, feel and taste. Like those, like if you can kind of do that, that you got them. Sharpen word pictures as well. So sometimes with descriptions can be very, very long. I try to kind of shave off a little bit just so it's not like over wordy. If you can kind of say what you want to say with fewer words, is always great. And then, you know, be specific. So if my character is driving a car, what kind of car? Like, you know, if I say, you know, I drove the car to work the other day, it's a little bit different than like I took the Jeep to work, because you can actually picture the Jeep, but you don't, if I say I drove the car to work, you don't really know what car I'm talking about. And sometimes, you know, the specific makes it more universal in a weird way. And then this is for me different from Pluto and the Family Way. I'm a kind of writer who wants to make sure that I'm not writing the same book over and over and over again. So I want to make sure that I do that. So that's it for now. I realize I'm probably a little bit am I going over time here? But no, we still have about 20 minutes. But I have a couple of activities here if people want to, because this is also reflection and journaling. So I want to give people an opportunity to maybe like reflect on some of the things that we were kind of talking about today, about the differences between traditional and chosen family. And maybe if you want to spend, I'm going to put a timer here for 5 minutes to write a paragraph about someone in your traditional family. This could be a description. You could write a description of them. This could be a dialogue between maybe someone and this person in your family. It could also be a first person thing, you writing as them. So if you want to write as your mother, you know, at the stove, waiting for her kid to come home. Like, you know, so just maybe spend 5 minutes if you want, and we'll come back in 5, okay? I'm gonna put on the timer. All right, see you in a few. All right, that was 5 minutes. I hope that was interesting. I don't know, does anyone want to share what they've written, or even maybe if not share, speak about maybe what you were writing about?
Yeah, I mean, sure, if it's okay. I don't want to cut anyone off there, but
Please, Anthony.
I wrote not about a particular individual in my family. I wrote sort of more of the archetype of the nonno great uncle, at least inspired by the men of that generation in my family. So this person in this paragraph is sort of an amalgam of those men that sort of colored my childhood, basically. So semi-fictional, semi-autobiographical in that way. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so Nonno had sailed thousands of miles from one island in the Mediterranean to another on the St. Lawrence and hadn't moved a foot since. In the 70 years he called Montreal home, his children and grandchildren could observe the city's history in his face, wrinkles that deepened like the cracks that erupted every construction season. They safeguarded a whirlwind of secrets he would never share, pouting lips that every Christmas and Easter drooped into a deeper frown. They hung still and unmoved, and spoke more than any words could ever hope to express. That's it.
Wow, you did that in 5 minutes? That's great. No, I really, really loved the detail there. It really, you were talking about how he looked physically, but also like the weight of like his experience also on top of that. So great.
Thanks for listening.
Anyone else want to share? Okay, that's totally fine. We'll do one more, and then we'll have questions and stuff like that. So this time I'm going to ask you to just reflect on your chosen family. So write about a friend or someone from your chosen family. Like, I don't know, maybe you do think about chosen family a lot. Maybe this is the first time. But when I talk about the person who always has a place at your dinner table, like who is that person? And maybe reflect on that for a little bit. So I'm going to give another 5 minutes here, okay? All right, so that was 5 minutes. Yeah, anyone want to share what you were working on? No worries if not. Oh, Marisa?
Hi, yeah, I can share. I just don't want to take over, you know? So if anybody else had put up their hand, I haven't seen it.
No,
Okay.
go ahead, please.
So I write about, okay, so kinship and solidarity amongst Goose villagers were the preponderance of the everyday. Despite financial and emotional hardships, the support system in the community was exceptional and legendary. Relationships established in the neighborhood have stood the test of time, as with my parents and the Furfaro and Yurachi families. Their friendship has endured more than 60 years over 3 generations. They have become our chosen family.
Thanks, Marissa. Marissa's working on a book about Goose Village, everyone, and I'm dying to read it when it when it comes out. Yeah, you know, the people still talk about that neighborhood today, like, you know, with such fond memories. It was the connections made there were so important, so good. And, you know, and I can only imagine too, when I get to be a certain age, how fondly I'm going to look back to on the connections that I made when I was much younger. Thank you so much, Marisa, for sharing that.
You're welcome. I
Um,
just say, Chris, I'm writing an introductory essay, so it's not like anywhere near what you've done. So,
oh, well,
you know, it's not a novel, but it's my I guess it's one of my first attempts at incorporating a serious amount of writing into my practice as an artist. So thank
I
you.
still can't wait.
You
All
have a
right,
big
well, pardon me, Steph, sure.
Thanks. Okay. If we were trying to get into a restaurant and there was a huge line with another person there to witness, the joke I would say to them was, should I tell them? Should I say that she is the creator of Seinfeld? Maybe that will help us get in faster. And then she would look at me and say, "What the hell are you talking about?" And we would all laugh together at the joke and then go look for another place to eat. Searching for a table to eat at was part of the fun. And that's it.
I love that. My friends and I would sing happy birthday at a bar to each other just so we get shooters, even though it was like no one's birthday. But anyway, I love that. I love that Seinfeld connection. Yeah. Um, anyone else? All right. Well, I just want to leave this open now for like questions. If anyone has any questions on things that like I brought up today, either about traditional or chosen families, or even about process. You know, I try to put a little bit here about process, about like how I write stuff. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions? Steph.
Yeah, I thought it was really useful the way that you described your process on how you map out character building and and the ethics in the writing, and as someone who writes like nonfiction or autoethnography, I think that that's also still useful. So it's sort of like a question and a comment. I was going to say, I think it's still useful, like for my process as someone who's doing nonfiction and autoethnography, to do this like separation work, because it's very emotional to write about the self. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Uh, thoughts about
Like doing the
say
same kind of character building, but it's like in your process, but it's like for a memoir, for example.
yeah. You know, one of the projects I have like in mind, I'd love to do a nonfiction book sometime in the future, and I'm probably a couple years before even starting that, but I'm already thinking about like how do I like how do I approach the people that I'm going to be writing about? How do I write especially the things that were difficult? Because obviously they're not necessarily going to want to come across as being difficult in a book either, right? Like, you know, But I think, yeah, I think these tenets would hold still, like, I think there is a way of telling the truth, but also respecting relationship, right? So, and making sure that whatever that you're doing, that the other person, I don't know, I don't think I could ever write a tell-all book with someone who really didn't want me to write the book. Like, I feel like I'd have to abandon it, right? Or figure out another way to kind of either not include them or kind of acknowledge the fact that I'm not including them. But I'm sure that that work must be, yeah, it would be very emotional for sure. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's just interesting to hear you talk about it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Steph. Anthony?
Yeah, I had a quick question about you sort of the 5 tips you gave earlier about writing about family. One of them was about avoiding cliches. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about whether you can elaborate on that, because as someone who wants to write too about, growing up queer in the East, in an East End Italian family, a part of that experience was dealing with both homophobia from the community and also homophobia that by extension we internalized, even though I don't want that to be sort of the suffocating overall factor. So my question is then, what, maybe if you can impart some advice about how to sort of balance that fine line, just because, something I've noticed that it's nice to have refreshing stories of families who are more accepting, but are surprisingly more awkwarded out by things, about, being a sperm donor or things like that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing about a lot of queer people is a lot of them end up in some way or another sort of creating that distance between like a more conservative upbringing, conservative community they grew up in, and their current present day-to-day lives. But I'm trying to write from the perspective of a queer person who still has to navigate those spaces on a daily basis, even if they don't themselves live in it. So I'm just curious to know then if you can impart some advice for me and for anyone else who's interested about this sort of thing.
And I realized, Anthony, too, like maybe that wasn't the best example that I gave about like having a homophobic parent, right? Like as being a cliche. That totally exists, right? I think
But it does feel cliche to some extent too. So again, like how to make it authentic
yeah.
without.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you make them a complicated person, like and that their identity is not just there to be the homophobic parent, right? Like that's going to be like coming in saying the things that maybe we've heard before a million times, but if there's a way that you could kind of balance that and actually kind of show some kind of dimension to that situation, that wouldn't be like, I'm trying to think like what you would see on a sitcom, I guess is what I'm trying to talk about. Like, oftentimes I feel, especially in Italian culture, when we're portrayed on screen or something like that, there's the very easy things that we go, mom comes out with lasagna and like, food seems to be this like cliche too. We do see food, and we like seeing writing about food, and we like seeing food on screen and stuff like that. But it's just like, I guess, not just staying in that level of like surface of, I guess maybe is what I'm trying to say. Like these things are true and they're real. Like, a lot of cliches are kind of, there's a reason they're a cliche, because it's, true to, I guess, to an extent. But maybe what I'm trying to say is just don't kind of just go shallow in there and, include these characters as like, two-dimensional or one-dimensional, but actually kind of give them a little bit more complexity to that, is what I would say.
Make them somewhat sympathetic to an extent, maybe.
Yeah, like, I mean, I mean, you could make them out to be a villain, but like, I think if people are not rarely that kind of two-dimensional anyway, right? Like, and I think there are different ways of telling kind of a similar story. Like, like, I mean, gay guy gets his heart broken, like, my story, like, oh my God, film at 11, we've done, but like, how do you do it in a way that you feel for those characters as well? And like, so I think just also kind of just questioning yourself, like if something does feel a little bit, does it need to be there, right? Like, but I wouldn't worry too much. I think like, at least at the beginning, like what you're kind of setting out to do, that's something also you can check out in editing too, right? Like if there's certain qualities or characteristics that you're giving your writer that you think kind of make them a little bit more of a cliche, what can you kind of take back, what you can kind of, so that we're not just kind of saying the same thing over and over. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that was really great. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, that's project number 2. I'm still on project number 1. But when I get there, it's good. It will be good to keep in mind.
All right. Well, we're already at 1:30. Maybe is there final question anyone has?
I agree. I don't have a final question. I just have a comment, and Anthony, your question was so good. I feel that too. I'm glad you raised it, Chris, because cliches are something that, with, I'll speak from our perspective as Italian Canadians or Canadian Italians. A lot of the stories are very similar, and so you keep hearing the same narrative being repeated. They came over with $15 in their pocket, and I mean, everybody came over with $15 in their pocket, but at the same time, it's true. And there were struggles about being poor and about being, treated badly when they first came to Canada and all of that. So, I find it sometimes very difficult to, like Anthony, to strike that balance with saying the truth, best ethical practices, of course, but also finding another way to have these common experiences resonate with less cliche wording, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Like just a quick example, not to overshare, but basically in that story I'm conceiving of, the matriarch of the family, the mother of the protagonist, is partly inspired by my grandmother in one way, in that my paternal grandmother was not a very good cook. And so I wanted this character, this older Italian woman who was born in like the early 40s or something in Italy, is not a great cook, because it asks the question then, because food is so central to our sense of Italianita, what happens when you take food out of the equation? Are we no longer as Italian? Like what, it just forcing, like when those stereotypes are away, like what keeps us Italian or not, and just something I'm pondering in the interim. So just wanted to say that. Yeah.
You see, like Anthony, that's fascinating to me. Like I feel like that's a fresh take also on like, I think that's what I kind of mean. I don't think we have to kind of worry so much about, everyone's story is going to be different, even if it is similar. Like, I think also, and I think you just have to kind of, I guess when I cliche, like I said, like I just, not Super Mario, right? Like I feel like a lot of times that's what I know. Like I feel like there is this sense of like wanting to kind of go very lazy on some. I'm gonna make even Irish. I'm writing about the Irish community, right? Like, and it's equal there too, right? Like there's a lot of the fact that my dad is like loves Irish. Like to me, that's kind of also a unique take on like the kind of like identity of being an Italian and he once went to an Irish bar and sang like an Italian song on the open mic and they booed him. Like it's just one of like, these are kind of the fun little things that like kind of just take it out of the what you would expect on a 30-minute sitcom about Italian people. And that's I guess what I'm trying to kind of get at. But I don't want to kind of be negative in terms of, I think you follow the stories where they go, you'll make it your own for sure. All right, so thank you everyone for this. This was really great. A couple just final thoughts. Just think about that question again. Who are your people? Like, just keep that in mind. Sometimes, sometimes it is the people that are in your biological family. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's both. So maybe just kind of keep that in mind. And then, remember that community is family too. This here's like a picture of my book club. I lead a book club called the Violet Hour Book Club. We've been meeting since 2018. And we meet every month to discuss a different book of LGBTQ literature. You can see here, there's 21 people here. 2 people met their partners through this thing, which I thought was so great. Some of our members are seniors, and it's a really great way for them to kind of connect with younger people as well. So I consider them my family. I love them very much. There's not much I wouldn't really do for them as well. They all have a seat at my table too. So, think about that too. And thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Richa, over to you.
Yes, I'm here. I'm going to close officially. So thank you so much, Chris, for a really wonderful workshop. And thanks everyone for being here today. And thank you also for sharing. I put in the chat the link to the Acenti site. You can check out future workshops. You're invited to join us for workshop 3, which is on Friday, June 16th. At 2:30 Eastern Time on Zoom, and that is Indigenous Italian Canadian Connections, reflecting and sharing with Paolo Frasca and Angela Nardozzi. So I hope you'll join us for that. Thank you all for being here at Acenti's workshops to express creativity, engaging Canadian seniors, a project made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program. Thanks, everyone. I hope to see you again soon. Have a great weekend. Don't forget Mother's Day.